Everhart, and we're here for Veterans Project. With me today is Ed Gorman. Ed was with the Normandy invasion. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
When you were born, when and where?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1924.
1924, and you went into the Army?
I went into the Army in late 1942.
And you were enlisted, or did you get that?
I enlisted. I tried to enlist right after Pearl Harbor was bombed. In fact, the best buddy, Pat Esposito, and I, and then another friend, Bill Yowen, tried to enlist at the same time. And that's when the lines were around the corner, those blocks long, waiting to enlist. And unfortunately, I was only 17 and a half, and I needed my parents' consent. My dad's a World War I veteran, and I had an older brother who already had a draft number. And they sort of said, well, maybe you ought to finish school first. And so they talked me out of it. Both of us, both Patty and I, his parents said the same thing. And so we waited, and then finally, after we were old enough and realized that the war was going to be around for a long time, and my parents finally consented. My dad and mom really didn't want to, but they said okay. And then I was 18 when I enlisted.
But you were persistent. You were going to go.
Oh yeah, we were going to go. Yeah, he and I were going to go. Patty and I were going to go together, and we did. For the first couple of weeks, and then we went out to. After we enlisted, we were sent to Fort Dix for indoctrination for a couple of weeks and get some equipment, and then they shipped us out to Camp Crowder, Missouri. Of course, we joined the Signal Corps.
Okay.
And then while we were at Camp Crowder, Missouri, after our basic training, that's where we took our basic training, they sent us to specialized school. They sent Pat to wire school to be a lineman, and then they sent me to radio school.
So you're a radio operator then?
I was a radio operator. They sent me down to Port Arthur, Texas, to Port Arthur College, and I was down there for 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks, in training, learning all about radio communications. But fortunately, I knew some of the code, Morse code, because of my Boy Scout training. Patty and I were both in the Boy Scouts together. And that's why we chose the Signal Corps.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So now, you crossed the Atlantic.
Yes.
After your training.
After training here.
And where were you before the landing?
Well, before the landing and even before we left to go overseas, because the type of a unit that I was finally assigned to was called the 294th JASCO, Joint Assault Signal Company, and then it became Joint Assault Special Communications Operations. Okay. And there were 5 such units like that in the whole United States Army. There was an idea of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to form these specialized units who would be amphibious trained, meaning amphibious invasion trained. And our specialty was landings and supplying the total communications operations for an amphibious landing. And we're a unique unit because when I left Texas, there were 12 of us that left the school that we attended, and we arrived at Camp Bradford, Virginia. It was a naval base, and we were the only 12 Army men on the naval base, and the commandant of the base wanted to know what we were doing there. And I had the orders for us, and little did he realize it, evidently. But then the rest of my outfit started to arrive the next day, and then finally our cadre arrived, and they got everything all squared away. But that first night, they didn't know where to put us. They wanted to send us off the base. But fortunately, they found a place for us to sleep.
So you were Navy's stepson for
basically, that's why I say, when people kid about the Army and the Navy, I was just as much Navy as I was Army, because I'd say that 60% of my time in the Army was spent on board some kind of a ship, whether it was a landing craft or a ship traveling from one place to another.
So now you crossed the Atlantic.
We crossed the Atlantic.
How long did you wait before you got the call that it was going to happen?
We crossed the Atlantic in late fall, November, like around November of 1943, and we were stationed at a camp in Swansea, Wales, called Camp Singleton. And there we did more training, because everywhere we went, we basically had to do training with the components of our outfit, which were all specialized. We were assigned to the 5th Engineer Brigade, Special Brigade. And this was the outfit that was trained to go in pre-dawn and pre-landing, first wave landing, to dismantle whatever defenses that they could, underwater, above water, before the invasion, the actual first wave started or landed. So our training was with them, and then we were assigned, the brigade was assigned to the first division engineers. And so we trained, while we were in Wales, we trained with the various units of the total invasion force in practice a number of times. And as I say, I was on water as much as I was on land quite often. And we trained almost 1 week out of a month, or sometimes even more, on the practice landings until the invasion.
Now, the word came down. How did the word get to you that it was going to happen?
We just got our so-called shipping orders.
Okay.
They gave us our orders to pack up and get waterproof, so to speak.
So then you knew.
And then we knew. And we were in Weymouth, England, and we were transported over to a rendezvous base, so to speak, a rendezvous point, and then before we boarded the ships. Now, we actually boarded the ships on June 2nd of 1944, because the invasion was supposed to be on June 4th. But because of the weather, we had already set sail on June 3rd, and it got so bad out in the channel that we had to turn around and come back in. And then the big decision was, now, do we keep all of these troops on board the ships, or do we take them off? And then what about the element of surprise? These are things that I've heard afterwards,
Sure.
of course. But they were worried about the element of surprise and everything else. And at the time, I guess the Germans must have had some inkling of something taking place. But we did sail. They decided to keep us on board the ships. And at the first break in the weather, we would set sail for the shores of France.
And they were prepared for your arrival, the Germans.
To a great extent, they were. They were and they weren't. They really didn't know where we were going to land. They had an idea that we were going to hit the shores of France or somewhere along the coastline.
I could just imagine, maybe if you can just take me back a little bit, what your feeling was as soon as that platform lowered and you knew I'm running ashore.
Well, there were some preliminary things prior to that, John. First of all, we were all told that we had to be ready at 2 o'clock in the morning for the final. That's when we found out really where we were going, to tell you the truth. Even though I was a team leader and the officers of my company, my command, thought they knew, but they didn't get the actual orders until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And we had a staff meeting, and they told us where we were going and where we were landing and what our assignment was. And at the last minute, my particular unit, my particular team, was transferred from going over the side of the ship down the ladders into a Higgins boat to what they call a Rhino ferry. And a Rhino ferry was basically nothing more than a flat barge, maybe about 24 feet long and 40, maybe 36 or 40 feet long. And it was wide open. It was constructed of a series of air tanks. Thank God for that.
Yes.
And we boarded that. My assignment at the last minute was from the assault team that I was originally assigned to with the infantry unit to land the second wave in the Higgins boat. I was assigned with they pulled us one particular team off that I was on, and they assigned us to the brigade headquarters team. And again, we boarded, as I said, about 4 o'clock in the morning, and this Higgins boat, this Rhino ferry, and they rightly named because it only do 6 or 8 knots. You being an old Navy man know how fast that is.
Yeah.
It mean how slow. But we were scheduled to land at 6:50 in the morning. So you figure from 4 o'clock to, of course you have the rendezvous points on the way in and
Still
all.
a long ride.
It's still, and it was a slow ride, So what happened was because of the resistance that the first wave in particular, and even the second wave hit at the beach, and the beach was backed up so badly because there was just no movement, no way of anybody moving on the beach because the defenses were so tremendous, that we had to back off and troll. And that's what we did for the most part of the day. Then they said, well, we'd go in and hit at noon. On the way in, we hit a mine. So and we couldn't get our ramp down, so we had to back off from that, and we trolled some more. And we were under heavy fire while we were out there trolling because we were only about 3/4 of a mile or so off the beach. We could see a lot of what was going on at the beach, and we wanted to, we felt like sitting ducks out there because stuff was flying all around us. And we were trying to talk to our coxsman into, going head on in. He said, no. And we were the communications teams, and we could hear a lot of what was going on. There was a lot of coded stuff that we couldn't decipher. But he had his orders, and he knew what the code of the day was and everything else. And he knew that he had to back off and control. And while we were trolling, we were under pretty heavy fire. And there was a British destroyer that came along and laid down a smoke screen for us, which really saved us because the fire from the beach, the German fire from the beach, was just tremendous. And we were under that smoke screen for a couple of hours back and forth.
Okay.
And finally we got the ramp fixed. But again, the beach was so crowded they wouldn't let us come in. When they did finally let us head to shore, it was dusk, really getting dark. We hit another mine. In the meantime, we were strafed by a couple of German airplanes and dropped a rack of bombs on either side of us. It was like a 4th of July thing. And we, when that was happening to us, all of us would just get us the heck out of here. Let us get on shore, because we could see and hear a lot of what was going on shore.
Like you said, you're a sitting duck.
We were sitting ducks. So we finally landed, and they had to clear space for us, and we landed late evening, and almost dark. And fortunately, we still had all of our equipment because we met some of our other teams when we landed, particularly one officer, Lieutenant Hooper, and he's the one that guided us into the beach. And he and my particular officer, Lieutenant Berry, were very close friends. And fortunately, they had walkie-talkies that enabled them to communicate and get us into the beach. And they needed our equipment real bad because most of the communications teams, of course, we had wiremen as well as radio operators, and they lost a lot of their equipment getting into the beach. We lost some equipment when we lost some of our cargo, so to speak, and I use that term loosely, when we hit the mines,
Okay, yeah.
But when we finally landed, under the cover of darkness, we didn't even set up our radio at the time because there was one operating there, but they needed our equipment in other places. And we became wiremen. We were stringing wire up and down the beach, and that's when it really,
Moving through all of that heavy fire with wires.
the carnage. You were. Excuse me.
It's fine.
The bodies, and even though it was dark and what you saw was shadows, and lighting wasn't that good, but plenty good enough for you to see what was going on.
Slight blessing in disguise.
And we just had to work around all of that. And as you know, Omaha Beach was the hardest hit beach
That was the heaviest
in the
hit.
invasion, and there were thousands lost that day, and they were still floating in the water.
Now, your mission, your radio, its purpose was to
Our
guard
mission was a
fire or-
complete, our particular mission was a complete communications of the whole beachhead. We controlled everything in and off the beach, up in the air. Our special unit consisted of not only Signal Corps people, Army Signal Corps, but also Army artillery advanced communications teams, Air Force advanced communications teams, and Navy communications
So you were
teams.
the ears of the pretty
So
much the
we were
entire
the
landing.
ears, basically, of the complete landing, and we covered everything from the sky onto the ground and from shore to offshore.
So you direct
Everything
fire
in and
and-
everything.
Wow.
We had, our people were inserted or insurgents with the infantry, the artillery, Air Force. Unfortunately, in spite of all of the tremendous bombing that took place at that beach, from offshore, from the ships offshore, and believe me, when that barrage started at 4 o'clock in the morning, the skies just lit up. And it was just constant bombardment up
Do you know how
until
many naval ships they had there?
they
that
say
assault?
that there was a total of 5,000 ships involved in the invasion. And they had ships of all sizes, shapes, and forms, from the biggest to the smallest.
And there was air support.
Well, there was air support, fortunately, for all the other beaches except Omaha. Omaha Beach is the only beach that the Air Force missed. And that's why we took such a beating to it. Because there were no bomb shelters or bomb holes for us to use as protection. There was just the bare beachhead. There was nothing there. Any holes in the beach we had to dig with our hands or with the spades we had, the little tools we had.
Now, how long were you actually on the beach itself?
I was on the beach all the first night. Of course, we couldn't move. But the first crack of dawn, we had to go through because, again, the beach was still loaded with minefields. There were very few trails off the beach except for the one major opening in the beach, and that was the big opening that they made in the past by Colville-Samere,
Okay.
where the big guns were. And thank goodness for the engineers that set the bombs and the dynamite that blew
Cleared
up
the
that hole
mines.
opened up that. And that pass was just solidly blocked. But
I'm assuming, did you get any sleep at all that night? Or
I didn't sleep for almost 64 hours. No sleep that night, no sleep the next night. And we set up our communications right there at the opening of where you saw in any of the movies where they blew the bandolier discharges and blew open that space. That's where we set up with the brigade headquarters. So we were right there.
Yeah.
And the town was like from here up to St. George Avenue.
a stone's throw away?
That's yeah. And you see pictures of that. The mayor of that town running out in his underwear. Well, that was a guy that he was in that town that we landed by. And so we were there for a while, and I guess it was D+2 late in the afternoon because each day they said there was going to be a counterattack that we had to be watching out for and be on the alert for, and then we would get strafed every day by a couple of the German airplanes that were still flying, even though there weren't that many. And I finally said to my guys, I got to get some sleep. And so there was a damaged Jeep sitting on the side of the road, and I said, I'm going to go sit in the Jeep and see if I can get some sleep. And I was sitting in the Jeep sleeping, actually, when Billy Weingartner, this real good buddy of mine, he was one of my team men, he was my number 2 man, come over and he's yelling at me, get out of the Jeep, get out of the Jeep, get out of the Jeep. And I'd say, but I was so tired. And what it was, I was being strafed and didn't really know.
Oh my! So you were tired.
So I just rolled onto the Jeep and he jumped onto there with me.
Oh,
you
so
know.
you slept while people were shooting at you.
Yeah, well, we tried to anyway, because we were so tired. But And then, you know, we remained in France, and our unit got reorganized, and we proceeded to go inland with our unit, with our teams and so forth, in support of the 1st Division as they went through that part of France into the Battle of St. Lo.
Now, the beach was secured.
The beach was secured to a point because the Germans weren't that far away.
Okay.
St. Lo is what, about 13, 14 miles from the beachhead, something like that, very close to the beachhead. And we were stopped there.
Now, the townspeople, when they had to know by now, well, but here are the
Oh
Americans.
yeah, no, the townspeople were tremendously supportive, you know, and those that had been supportive of the Boches, as they called it, you know, they took them out and they treated them somewhat shamefully, you
Yes.
know. And we captured a lot of Germans. We captured an awful lot of Germans, and they kept bringing them back to the beachhead, and then they kept them sort of contained at the beachhead until they could put them on ships and get them back to England or where they were going to send them to the camps, you know.
But there was
prison camps.
information, hopefully, in these Germans.
Oh yes, yeah. We had a little incident. It was about the early morning of D+2, I guess it was, and they kept talking about the counterattacks. And a couple of our guys, this one fellow in particular, Van Etten, his name was, about 6'6". He was bigger fellow than he could curl up into like a snake and become so small it wasn't even funny. And he and this fellow Bill DeLong were on duty, and we sort of, you know, our jobs were while we were specialists in one field, like radio operators and so forth, or wiremen, but we also, you know, when somebody was working, then we were riflemen protecting them.
You were a soldier also.
We were soldier, right. And they were on guard duty this day protecting the unit, the team, and they noticed this little movement, and they said, "What the heck is that?" And what it was a sniper, because we kept hearing the sniper fire, and we didn't know where the heck it was coming from. And this guy was in a hole in the ground.
Oh my gosh.
And they saw him, and they went over and they flipped that lid of that thing open, and there he was, young kid.
God.
There were a lot of young German, they were kids, you know, and even when we got off the beach.
You were a kid, Ed.
I was only 20 years old.
Yeah.
Just 20, yeah. And we had to be very, very careful because the Germans they set booby traps like you wouldn't believe. And when we took over the bluff where the guns and the enforcements were, the machine gun emplacements and the trenches that ran from one end of the beach clear to the other. You could walk from one end of Omaha Beach to the other end of Omaha Beach without even showing your head. That's how fortified it was.
Oh, they were fortified.
And they were in and out, you know, the trenches and the dugouts that they had were down maybe 1 or 2 stories below surface, and you know that it was really an underground home, and everything was booby trapped. That's where the engineers had to go in there and dismantle so many booby traps, and we wanted to use those trenches and all for protection, but we couldn't go in there.
You didn't know what you'd find.
Yeah, I say my team, we set up our radio on the side of the bluff in a little cave, and then at night during the day we'd bring it out, but at night we'd bring it in for protection, and we were there for I was in that position for about a week until they moved us, and as we advanced in France, brigade headquarters would move it up a little bit, and then we would move up with them. And so our unit stayed in France throughout the winning of St. Lo, the Battle of St. Lo, and then after that, they had us pulled back to the beachhead, and we were assigned the responsibility of setting up the complete communications system from where we were in Normandy, completely all the way down to Cherbourg.
My goodness.
for the Allied headquarters, yeah.
So now you had just landed at Normandy.
Yeah.
Just taken, for all intents and purposes, recaptured France from the Germans,
Yeah.
or to set things well underway. But apparently the Army wasn't done with you yet.
No.
They decided that Ed Gorman and company is
Yeah,
needed somewhere else.
Along around October, late October, early November, we had received orders to secure in France and pull back. We were being sent back to England, and for reorganization, so to speak. And we thought we were going to get ready to make another invasion somewhere else in Europe. And while we were in England, the Battle of the Bulge broke out. I had a brother in the Battle of the Bulge. I didn't know it at the time. Yeah, my older brother Jim, the one I thought wouldn't be drafted. He got drafted 3 months after
You enlisted.
After I enlisted, yeah. At any rate, he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and the Battle of the Bulge broke out. And this was around middle of December, and we thought sure that we were going to be being shipped back over into Europe somewhere, over to the mainland, and become a part of that, that force to protect and fight in the Battle of the Bulge. But they said, no, you have your orders, and you're being reassigned, rotated, reorganized. You're being sent back to the United States. So we said, well, wow, good deal.
Yeah.
We thought we were being sent back to become cadre or training for somebody else, because, as I said, there were only five outfits like our outfit.
Pretty elite.
And another strange coincidence with the number 5, there were only 5 Rhino ferries in the whole invasion, and I was on one of them.
The one that got hit.
That one that got hit.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a little bit later to talk about my return to France. But at any rate, they sent us back to the United States, and then when we got back to the United States, we had our travel orders to report to Camp Callum out in La Jolla, California.
That's not a good sign.
No. And that's when we found out we were being shipped to the South Pacific. And we were the first unit to be rotated and assigned to the South Pacific. So we have the distinction, if you want to call it that, of having served in both theaters of operation.
Which is, that's extremely rare.
Right.
I mean, you had just taken Normandy.
Right.
A huge success, a huge cost of lives.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're asking you now to do the
Right.
same thing in Japan.
Yeah. In fact, we were on board the Queen Mary, returning home during the Christmas holidays in 1944, and I have some, some souvenirs of that, because I have a copy of the menu that we had on Christmas Day on board that
It
ship.
looked like the menu. I saw the menu. It's some great food.
And then Herman Lehman, who was an ambassador at the time, was on board the ship too, and then he became governor of New York. Yeah. So we went over on the Mauritania out of Nova Scotia, all alone, unescorted by any submarines or naval vessels. We came back from Europe on a Queen Mary, and again, all alone, without any
No escort.
escort or anything like that, because both ships could travel faster than any of the escorts.
Yeah, she was
So we were very fortunate. Yeah.
very fish. But you didn't have to. Something occurred, and
Your
feelings
again,
on that.
When we got out to California, they reorganized us. We had to replenish our personnel. We had lost some personnel and so forth. So they re-strengthened our unit, and we had a lot of new assignees come on board and train with them. So again, we were back into training, and we shipped over to Hawaii. We were in Oahu, Hawaii, and out far into the beach of the island with a naval base. Again, more practice landings up and down the ropes. And then we had just come back from a major exercise on the the big island of Hawaii, and we were all waterproofed and loaded up, because when you're in training and you go into all the training and your exercises, you're waterproofing all of your equipment. You're extending the exhaust pipes on your Jeeps, and you're waterproofing your radio equipment and everything else. So we were all set. We thought we were finished with the exercise and we're coming back up to shore and coming back to camp when they said, no, stay on board. We said, oh, not again.
That can't be good.
So sure enough, this was in August. And while we were on board the ship, we thought we were going to set sail from Honolulu Harbor when they dropped the bomb. And so we stayed on board ship for the next 48 hours till they realized that Japan was going to surrender.
And you heard that they had just dropped this
They dropped
tremendous...
the bombs. And we were really assigned and ready to set sail for an advanced base, probably Okinawa or somewhere close to there for the invasion of Japan.
So
we knew that was going to come.
Guessing everyone on board that ship was thanking Harry Truman.
Yeah, we absolutely, because we took, and we were very fortunate in my outfit, where we only had about 23% casualties from Normandy. We anticipated a lot more.
In Japan, it would have been
For Japan,
23%.
because it was, it was predicted it was going to be a real
Fierce fighting.
serious fighting. So we were very fortunate. Yeah.
So now, some 50 years later,
Yeah.
Ed Gorman, someone contacts Ed.
Yeah.
Says,
Yeah. I happened to be on a committee. I guess it was a state committee, and the federal committees were organized all across the country to put together programs to remember and celebrate various important dates during World War II: Pearl Harbor, Iwo Jima, D-Day,
D-Day.
Battle of the Bulge, the surrender of Japan. And I was on that committee for 3 years. And while I was on that committee, I became friendly with a couple of guys. And a couple of years after that, for the 55th anniversary of Normandy, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, Regional News Network wanted to do a documentary on D-Day and talk about the VA and some of the shortcomings of the VA at the time and the help that was needed by veterans from the VA and from the government for a lot of the veterans that were hurting. And they selected 6 of us to return to France.
wow, what a treat.
There were 2 from the 101st Airborne. There were 2 from the 82nd Airborne. There was 1 from the 1st Division Engineers, and then myself from the Special Communications.
That's an elite crowd you were with.
Yes, very much so. And so they did Regional News Network, and that whole French family was just absolutely wonderful to us, and took us back to France, back to Normandy, and they recorded and documented each of our participations at the various beaches or towns or communities in Normandy that we landed on. One of our 101st Airborne fellows, Joe Pisano, all his training was glider training, and recognizing the problem with the gliders and the way they had the protection of the fields for those glider planes, they pulled him off at the last minute, and he landed by boat in the Higgins boat on Utah Beach.
Now you saw something there too that was very interesting. It was
Yes, they had a regular program for us each day, and the one particular day, one of the first ceremonies we attended was at Pointe du Hoc. And while we were attending the services there, and the French were absolutely wonderful to us. There's stories I could tell about that. But I happened to look down onto the beach because I was telling, they knew, the people in the group knew that I came over and I landed on at the D-Day in a Rhino ferry. And down on the beach at Pointe du Hoc, the only craft that we saw, the whole shoreline of Normandy, was a Rhino ferry with the 2 holes in it, that just like where the right
Yes.
center beam, and then starboard bow.
Holy cow.
Yeah, and it was odd when I was on, and I have pictures of it. And what a feeling it brought back, I'll tell you. I couldn't believe it.
Imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
To be the one that was there.
Yep.
And I imagine it's staying there as a remembrance of that day.
I don't know if it's still, that was now 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years ago this June. And then we each did, they taped us and interviewed us on each part of the beachhead that we, landed on, and they taped me over on the bluff overlooking all of Omaha Beach, where I landed.
Which is a pretty beach now.
Oh yeah, they got all
Beautiful.
condominiums, and it's just they have a golf course there.
Wasn't like that.
But
when
they
you were
also have that big cemetery on Blistow.
Now there's a great picture of you at that cemetery paying tribute to your fellow soldiers, and excellent picture.
There's over 9,000 men.
9,000. And you mentioned 23% as being not bad.
Right.
That's tremendous.
But the losses on Omaha Beach were just tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And it was quite a sight, because as I stood on that bluff overlooking the beach, you could still see the gun emplacements.
Wow.
The outline of them in the ground, and the trench that ran from one end of the beach, and just, because, it's the outline is still there. You could just see all of that stuff. And when I was standing there then, because back in '44, after D-Day, and we had taken the beach, and we were up on the bluffs, there was so much activity going on the beach. You had personnel coming in, ships landing, personnel coming up the trails and up through the pass, and tracks, all kinds of vehicles moving. It was just one tremendous beachhead of activity. But then to see it when I did in 1999,
Quieter place.
quiet and serene, and you could see the clear shot that the Germans had of us on that whole beach. It
is scary when you look at those pictures that
really,
you were literally seeing ducks.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it's easy to see why we took such a beating that we did, because there wasn't an inch of that beach that wasn't covered.
They could see everything.
They could see every single inch of that beach from every vantage point, and they had the
Firepower.
personnel and the firepower to do it.
You
Yeah.
mentioned they had one of the cannons, which is it's on rails, or
On the rails, yeah, one of the
huge.
big 155 or whatever it was.
That's big.
Tremendously big. And it would roll out on railroad tracks and fire, and then recoil and roll back in. And they had the doors on this gun emplacement. The walls were at least 12 to 14 feet thick. And when our shells were just bouncing off it from the ships, we were hitting that thing like crazy, but they were just bouncing on these steel doors. And fortunately, one of our advanced artillery teams, one of the groups, timed the firing and recoiling of that gun, and we caught it when the doors were open. And that's the only reason why that gun was knocked out of.
Wow, good thinking.
And we were lucky, because that's the sucker that was shooting at me. And I was sitting out there like a,
Good timing.
duck
Good
on
thinking.
water. Yeah, we were sitting ducks out there.
So now,
And I don't know who that kid was or who that person was, but I thank him every day.
bought him a cup of coffee. You could have found him.
Yes.
Now, the war's over.
Yeah.
Ed Gorman gets to come home.
Yep.
How did you get back home?
Well, right after the declaration of the war ending and the signing of the documents, they broke up my outfit. And as I said, we were a specialized unit. So they dispersed us to various Signal Corps companies or battalions around. And when it came time for me to be rotated back home or discharged, I came home on board a Liberty ship that could only do 9 to 11 knots an hour.
It floats like a cork.
Uh-huh. And I went from Hawaii all the way around by way of the Panama Canal, all the way to the East Coast. 31 days on board that ship.
Today that would be a luxury cruise, but
I
back
tell
then
you.
in a Liberty ship.
The only good thing about it is I was able to get, my dad was a stevedore. And he had access to a lot of the berths and the piers in Brooklyn. And I told him what the type of ship I was on. He was able to find out, and he was there to meet me on board that pier, and got it.
Brooklyn Navy Yards.
Yeah, we were supposed to stay out in the harbor because it was a weekend, but he got us in on that Saturday, and thank God for that.
Yeah.
And and it was good to get home.
And the reception here, the welcome from...
Yeah, back in those days, we had the Blue Star program going all over the country.
And we're going to get into that because that's
Yeah.
a great thing.
And so, on the street that I live in, just on the one street, we called it a block in Brooklyn.
Yep.
Just on that one street, there were 37 guys in the Army or the military. And, only 2 didn't come home. But when you came home, everybody on the street turned out. They had a big monument displayed, a handmade monument where they had the names of everybody and so forth, and sort of like a shrine thing.
Big welcome.
Yeah, and so everybody turned out to welcome you home. Yeah, my friends, my buddy Patty got home safe, and
Good.
all the other friends I had. Because a lot of the guys that I went into service, or that were in the service, were all kids in the same Boy Scout troop. And there were 2 long streets. On one particular block, there were 13 of us that belonged to the same troop, and all went in.
And again, you were fairly active with the Boy Scouts afterwards
Yeah, well,
also.
I did. I went back to work at the national headquarters, and then became a member of the national staff of the Boy Scouts. Yeah.
Great organization.
Yes, it is.
Great
Yes.
organization. Now, I'm going to quickly hurl you up to today, and you had mentioned the Blue Star family. There's some things there and that you've personally done, Ron Davies has done with the Blue Star group. One in particular is a gentleman, I don't want to mention his name, who was injured in Iraq, and he applied for disability and got a low percentage. And both you and Ron, I think you're saying is something about...
McGreevy, too.
And Jack McGreevy,
Jack
yes.
McGreevy, tremendous help.
You're veterans helping veterans.
Right.
And you really push this, and I think this is just amazing. Right now, that young ex-sergeant now has 100% disability. The VA is taking care of him. So,
Well, to a point they are, and very, doing a good job, a fairly good job. But he's entitled to more, and we're working on getting him.
and you're going to go, yeah. You're
we're
not
still
going to
working on that case. No, it's there's a lot of fellas like him. I see him up at the VA all the time, right, up at East Orange in particular. But thank goodness the governor's aware of it now. And as I mentioned before, the documentary that RNN did, we were having trouble with the VA and getting, people covered from the Vietnam War and as well as Korea and even World War
Desert
II.
Storm.
And so the documentary sort of opened their eyes, and we were able to get them to realize that the Vision 3, which is a New York, New Jersey area, were being shortchanged in a lot of things as far as the veterans were concerned. And they made a lot of good changes. It's still, nothing is ever perfect as such, but they are trying harder. They're doing a much better job today. And really, rightfully so, particularly for these young kids today that are serving our nation so admirably. I have such admiration for them.
They are.
And such high respect
We
for
have
them.
such a great future generation ahead of us.
We do.
We really do.
Yeah.
The Blue Star family, and again, you have monthly meetings with the families. and
Right,
Just to
they
give everyone
do.
an idea of how it operates, it's the families, moms, dads,
Moms,
spouses.
dads, right, all get together at our post one day a month, and they just talk to each other.
The one I was at one, and we were discussing the anthrax vaccination, how it was affecting some of the
Right.
soldiers and stuff. So it was every one of them walked out of that meeting saying, "Wow, I got a lot."
Yes. You know, the thing that I admire so much about the group today is their meeting. See, I mentioned before about the street I lived on in Brooklyn, and there were 34, 37 of us that went into the service. And, you know, we were next door neighbors. We lived in the same apartment buildings or the house across the street. These folks are spread out all over the township, all over the various communities in between Union County and Middlesex County. And they come together once a month to support each other, to talk to each other, to share their experiences that they're having with their sons and daughters, to find out ways and means that they can help get more help and information to their children. And the thing that amazes me is the communications today, being a communications person. I am so amazed at the quick communications that they have today with their children overseas.
Yes.
They
Cell
talk to them almost
phones
every day or weekly. You know, we talked about Normandy, and somebody mentioned before about, well, when did you write home or whatever. I don't know when it was I wrote home, but when I got back home, my aunt told me the story about when she found out that when we all lived in the same apartment building, my grandmother on one floor, an aunt on another, cousin on another, there were 8 families, and we had 5 of the 5 families living in, you know.
5 of the 8 were there.
Or the 8 were our family. And this one aunt happened to hear about the invasion of Normandy. And this was later on, you know. And she said to my mother, Louise, she said, they just invaded France. And my mother says, so what? She said, well, Buddy is over there. She said, no, Buddy is in Wales. He's not over in France, you know. So when she found out about 2 or 3 months later that I was part of the invasion,
Oh, yeah.
but today it's instant.
Yes.
That's the thing I admire about the communication system today, and these families. They are so supportive and so dedicated to helping each other, and we feel honored that we're able to make our post home available to them for their meetings, to just
It's a good
have
thing.
their meetings and talk about the things that they talk about, and
They need to talk
try to
about
get them the help that they're looking for, bring in the people from the military or from the government to try to answer their questions and get them the information that they're seeking, and continue to look out for their children and things like that. Yeah, and we've grown. We're up to well over 45 families
It's a
now,
huge group.
and it's growing every month. Yeah.
Now, Ed, and this has been interesting, and I know you don't like to hear this, and you keep saying this over and over again, but in my mind, I'm sure in a lot of people's minds, you're a hero in our books. And yeah, you're a hero. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with hopefully some more stories of our veterans around Woodbridge. Thank you.